Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 140 for the National Land Realty Podcast. I'm your host, Mac Christian, and today is a super cool topic. We're talking with Dr. Scott Baier out of Clemson University. He is a professor of economics and a dean of the economics department, dean of research at Clemson University. And in case you can't tell, that means that Mr. Baier is much smarter than I am. So we're going to yield the topics to him, and we're going to cover a lot of them today. This is super cool. We're talking about global supply chains. We're talking about tariffs. We're talking about the big, beautiful bill. We're talking about the outsourcing of labor. We're talking about manufacturing jobs. And we're talking about some of the definitions that we hear all the time on the news that I feel like the news doesn't do a very good job of defining in a way that everybody else can talk about it and understand it. So that's the type of things that we talk about today. And the reason we talk about that is because this is what influences your commodity prices. This is what influences your land and real estate values. This influences everything around us, and we cover it from an objective view. And it's, this is our own news station, and we're covering this today. This is also a chance to see me in full-on allergy mode. If you watch this on YouTube, my allergies just started to hit, and I am allergic to, of all things, deathly allergic to grass. And oh my gosh. It's a wake-up call to see your own face go through something like that. So that's a part of the podcast too. Let's get this thing started. Sit back and enjoy. Thank you for listening to the show. Okay, welcome to the National Land Podcast, and I'm sitting here with Scott Baier. Scott Baier is currently a professor of economics, the associate dean of research at Clemson University. Scott, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get to Clemson? What got you to your current role?
How I got to Clemson. So I guess 25 years ago at some point, I was young enough that I decided to take a chance on living someplace different my whole life. I lived in Ohio, then went to graduate school in Michigan, and then I was working in Indiana at Notre Dame. And we were young, we had two kids at the time, and thought, well, let's try something different. I came down here. I liked the weather. I liked everything that the environment had to offer in terms of lakes, mountains, and everything. And so we gave it a shot, and now Clemson's stuck with me. How I got here, how I got in this role, well, I think I was department chair for about 8 years, and I was looking for something different, something a little bit more challenging. And so this opportunity to be associate dean of research opened itself up, and I've always taken seriously the research that's been done in economics and my research and looking for practical approaches. So this is a chance for me to look at what we're producing here at Clemson in terms of research and help market that and make sure people see the practical approaches and good things we're doing here research-wise.
Excellent. And today we're kind of going through sort of the economic circumstances of our times, right? Like we're looking at, and of course, we tend to look at more the agricultural side of things from National Land's perspective, but I think it's good to take an overhead view of what exactly is going on and why and how and rationale and where we're headed throughout the year and maybe how that affects kind of the rural economy.
Yeah.
So right now the big thing is tariffs. It's definitely the headline every single day because they've shifted so much and they've been used as sort of I'm going to call it, in a world of carrot and stick, it's a giant stick, and it it's a stick that swings both ways. Tell me where we currently stand with the tariffs. Because they seem to shift, and maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not. Maybe it was just to get people to the table. Maybe it's not. Where are we right now?
Where are we right now? Well, we remain in the current state of flux. Is that things do change day to day, and you're right. Is that the current administration, the Trump administration, has used tariffs almost as a stick to get people other countries to the negotiating table in order to, in some sense, get better deals for our producers. But again, with some of the tariffs that he's tried to put in place, it could really harm consumers as well. And so really we have to take this lens of how things are going to play out in the longer run. But currently, from day to day, or week to week, as we see, I think the big challenge we see right now is as the stance on tariff changes day to day and week to week, it becomes very difficult for firms to plan going forward. I mean, and if you can't plan going forward, it makes it difficult to hire. It makes it difficult to decide to, add a new factory, do many things. And so I think that's going to be a real drag on the economy until we get to wherever we end up. Is just the shroud of uncertainty that everybody's operating under right now.
Yeah, and with the current situation in, let's take North America, the tariffs on Canada were a unique situation. And as I was doing my notes, I noticed that you had done some previous work with putting Canada in the penalty box, I think, right?
yeah,
I had to ask you about that. Does that relate to what we're going through right now?
Yeah, I think, well, it would be the case that, it seems like Canada would tend to lose in any of these trade wars more than a lot of other countries, largely because while they're relatively rich in terms of per capita income, they're relatively small in economic size, and they happen to be relatively remote from the rest of the world, given their geographic position. So if you put in trade barriers between the U.S. and Canada, it's really going to impact Canada more than the U.S. And again, I was really surprised by, I think when President Trump won the election, we knew that tariffs were going to be on the table, but I think everybody was surprised that he came out swinging at Canada and Mexico first, right? He in the last administration, they just redid NAFTA into USMCA. So, we thought we were going to be good there, but again, he seemed to be worried about fentanyl and again, immigration flows. And as you mentioned, again, using tariffs as a stick, or as I've stated, when you have a hammer, I didn't come up with that statement, but when you have a hammer, you use the hammer, and that seems to be President Trump's main tool of choice right now.
So one of the questions is, as the tariffs hit, the conversation was supply chain. And then it's been a conversation of we have to wait to see what it does to supply chain. And all sort of hints have said that we're going to see the results of a limited supply chain here in the coming few weeks. Is that still a thing? Like it seems like one of those things, like it takes so long to happen. Yeah. You don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, again, this is this on and off of, are we putting the tariffs on or not? I don't think we're going to see it, in the near future. But I do know in talking with companies that is a major concern they have right now is their supply chains, and they're looking to diversify. And I think this is something that some firms started to do back in the pandemic, because
I was going to say, yeah, that's kind of we're already kind of old hat at this point at shifting around supply chains.
Right. And again, the amazing thing with 3D printing, it's allowed to be more nimble in terms of getting things set up in other countries. But I think for industries like the automotive industry, the bigger manufacturing, higher tech manufacturing, I think that becomes a lot more difficult to move the supply chains around as quickly. And another thing we're seeing that's kind of in the back burner of the tariffs, also again related to supply chains, is you're starting to see U.S. China taking different stances on what goods and what technology is going to be allowed to transfer from place to place. So I was reading the other day about the airline industry, or excuse me, the production of jets. We're not allowing some of our technology for jet engines to go to China, so they can't produce planes. And they're not giving us the rare earth materials now to produce the jet engines. And so, again, we seem to be blocking each other, again, doing damage to both the U.S. and China in this case.
And this is the rationale for not sending things to China is because of the history of reverse engineering our technology and then developing their own. Is that kind of the overall basis that we've used punitive measures for?
I think that's part of it. I think a bigger issue has been China's subsidizing exports, their exports, and the production of their goods to get a cost advantage over the U.S. and other countries, and then basically crowding out some of these other industries. So one of the main reasons why the U.S. has now increased the tariffs on steel and aluminum is because China really subsidizes steel production. Even though we don't import much from China, it gives them a huge advantage in terms of just think how many goods are produced using steel or aluminum. So it drives down their cost of production on all these other goods they export. They get a competitive advantage in the marketplace from subsidizing things. We think that that's unfair. Most people probably would think it's unfair. And even under the rules of the WTO, they would say it's unfair, but the WTO never acted on it. And so I think where we ended up was in this place where U.S. manufacturing and other countries' manufacturing were getting hurt by this type of subsidization. And so the Trump administration said, if the WTO isn't going to do anything, we're going to do something ourselves. Now that's a very favorable spin on the steel and aluminum tariffs that the administration's put in place. I'm not saying it's completely justified, but that's providing some justification for it.
I got you. And China as an actor in this whole thing, the World Trade Organization, have they just not done anything because China tends to take sort of an aggressive posturing when there is a punitive action? Is that what they've kind of held themselves kind of above the fray by sort of doing this? What's kind of stopped the the counter?
It's always the counter reaction. You always worry about, well, if we're going to go after China for this, how will China respond? And then there's also a sense of, that the consumers then, even though these goods are subsidized, the consumers are getting goods on the cheap. And so while you could help U.S. producers, you may be harming U.S. consumers, and you have to weigh that. So, when do you hit that tipping point that the U.S. producers are harmed enough that we don't, that we don't worry as much about harming consumers? So there's a lot that goes into that. One, the retaliation, again, also weighing consumers and producers in deciding, what policies to implement.
Is there, when we look at the conversations, because I mean the conversations that we hear as headlines are seldom, let's take the tariffs on China, right? It's what we see in the headlines is seldom the whole issue. It's usually the surface issue. Has it been as unfair in terms of trade agreements worldwide that things are being portrayed?
I don't think so at all. In fact, we're
putting your feet above the fire now.
No, I think, in a couple of, it's hard to show charts on a podcast, but when I give talks looking at these key things, like when China went in the WTO or when NAFTA went in place, if you look at like U.S. manufacturing employment and how relative to overall employment and how it changed, say after NAFTA and how it changed after WTO, China went into the WTO, you would not even be able to predict it because it's not even noticeable on the graph. Manufacturing employment in the U.S. has been on a steady decline since the 1970s. Over the last 10 or 15 years, it's kind of leveled off. So the main reason why we've lost a lot of our jobs in manufacturing, trade has played some role, no doubt, but the main reason is because technology-wise, our technologies improved so much that we can produce as much manufacturing with a lot less workers. In fact, if you look now, we're producing about 150% more manufacturing goods than we were back in compared to the 1970s, with only about 75% of the labor. So again, manufacturing employment's gone down largely because we're so much better at producing manufacturing goods than we were before.
And that's a combination of, one, efficiency in the workplace, and two, technology with everything from automated devices to robotic devices. When you're talking about, metals manufacturing and parts manufacturing, most of that's done by robotic arm. There's things like that you're right. When you look overseas, you don't see as much of that. You see human tended devices as opposed to robotic tended devices.
That's exactly right. When growing up, as I mentioned, in Ohio, I worked the summers at a General Motors plant where my father worked, and I worked alongside. I could reach out my arms either way, and I would, hit workers standing next to me. Now, if I walk into, say, the BMW plant here in Spartanburg, South Carolina, I'd be lucky to see hardly any workers in the plant because so much now is automated at the plant. Again, robotics and other technology. It's just reduced the demand for workers so much.
So that is a new piece of information for me, like that manufacturing has plateaued in the last 15 to 20 years. That initial dip from the 70s until the 90s was mostly efficiencies, and there has been overseas exported manufacturing, but you brought up BMW. That's not an American company, and now they're manufacturing here. There's other countries that are manufacturing here in order to get a easier supply chain to a consumer market as large as ours, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, so there are different reasons why you would want to offshore, outsource, offshore your production. Sometimes it's you can get cheaper labor. Other times it makes a lot of sense for the firm to locate closer to where the consumers are. That's why BMW is producing the SUVs here in upstate South Carolina. It's the reason why Michelin is also here in South Carolina. So you either move to where the cost of production are cheaper, or you can move to where your consumer base is, and firms do that calculus all the time.
And then, I do know there's different offshored manufacturing for parts, but it's not, I think the conversation gets stated like, certain car manufacturers will have parts made overseas, but it's not efficient to make a car overseas and then ship it over. We're talking about brake parts or, different components that are made overseas and then shipped back over to assembly in the United States. There's a lot of nuance that gets played with this, and the politics is always seldom paints the whole picture because you're trying to win elections.
No, that's right. Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. Again, using South Carolina as an example, is if you look at auto parts trade with Mexico, that's almost 50% of South Carolina's total trade with Mexico. It's just shipping parts back and forth, and then it gets assembled into new cars. Those cars are either sold in the U.S. A good share of them are sent up to Canada, and very few of the finished cars go back to Mexico. That's just the nature of supply chains.
I understand. So, the conversation of fairness within, let's take NAFTA, for example. You just talked about it being reworked. What are they trying to get accomplished with the current state of agreements as they are, even though they just got changed?
Yeah, I think a large part of it has to do with, again, non-trade related things, better border control, whether
So we're going into immigration, huh?
Immigration or again, and again, similar with the fentanyl. I think those are the main things. The last, the USMCA or NAFTA 2.0 really did update a lot of things that had changed in the world environment since 1994. Again, part of it was the offshoring, outsourcing, addressing that issue, but also part of it was technology. And we trade so many things that are now in bytes that weren't traded back then. We had nothing included, no clauses for that. So it updated things for digital trade and things of that nature. So again, it's a pretty modern trade agreement now. I think now they're negotiating over non-trade related items. Again, when you have a hammer.
When you have a hammer. As far as like where we're headed, what do you think the result of sort of these policies will be? Because the headlines are our trade agreements are unfair. We're bringing people to the table so that we can get manufacturing back into the United States of America. And, the overall consensus is that setting up manufacturing in the U.S. cold, right? Like I've got manufacturing in Indonesia and I need to all of a sudden bring everything in the U.S. That's like an 8-year process. Like as far as getting things over here, it does seem like like tariffs are being used as sort of we're addressing ancillary issues that are not necessarily manufacturing production economics. We're talking more of immigration policy. We're talking, like you mentioned, fentanyl. There's other pieces that we're using this to get people to the table.
Yeah.
What's sort of the outcome that you see from where we were to where we're headed?
Yeah. So I've in thinking about this, I ask myself, and it's always dangerous to do, why we're so much different in 2025 than we were in 2016. Because we did have tariffs implemented in 2016, and they were big at the time, but this seems much more. So I think part of it where we're ending up is I think we've learned a lot, or learned a lot may not be the right word. The world has changed in some ways. I think part of it was the pandemic, where we ended up where during the pandemic we couldn't get certain things that we needed, personal protection devices and things of that nature. And I think it made both the Democrats and the Republicans more worried about we should be producing more at home, not just bringing manufacturing home, but there are some things that emergencies can lead to that we want to be producing at home. So it can be, again, related to the, things that were at the pandemic, or again, computer chips. There's been a big push to have more computer chip production back in the US. So again, I think that changing landscape, now fast forward to this administration, I think there's been more desire to bring those type of manufacturing goods back into the US. And so that's why you've seen those type of tariffs. Where we're going to end up, I don't see these tariffs bringing a tremendous amount of manufacturing and manufacturing employment back to the U.S. I think we'll end up, I think by the end of the administration, with moderately higher tariffs than we had before, and maybe manufacturing in a couple different industries that they target. You'll see more employment and production back in the U.S.
So I want to kind of, and actually, before I shift topics, I was going to shift to the big, beautiful bill here for a second. Yeah. And, but we were talking legalities, and there have been court interactions on the tariff that have been imposed, where one court has decided that this is not an emergency clause issue. This is executive order, and constitutionally, tariffs have to be implemented as an act of Congress. Yep. And it looks like this has legs, right? Like, and we were just talking about this before. It looks like this is like the courts have grounds to stop the whole tariff thing. That's a significant barrier. We're talking about as far as what the administration has pushed, and it almost seems like they've been preemptively loading the deck with courts are going rogue. But when it comes down to constitutionality, like, this is a constitutional issue, not necessarily a court issue. But it looks, we might actually see everything that we've been talking about stop.
Yeah. So, over time, what's happened was that, initially, Congress had tariff authority, and over time, especially after World War II, they gave some of that authority up to the president, again, under the view that we're moving to a more free trade society under the WTO and the GATT. So you had things like Trade Promotion Authority, which allow the president to negotiate free trade agreements. So that's NAFTA, USMCA, and all the other trade agreements we had. But they also gave him some authority to work with USITC in case, firms were dumping products in the U.S. at cheap prices. Again, the steel and aluminum example, where you could do an investigation, and then if you found out that they were behaving badly, that you could respond to certain industries very targeted. The one that kind of came out of the blue here is this Emergency Act, where President Trump said, we're running trade deficits with these countries. That's not good for the U.S. economy. In fact, I'm going to call that an emergency. And then he talks with Treasury, his appointed Treasury Secretary, and then they agree that, yes, this is an emergency. And then they could put tariffs on almost uniformly across all countries and all goods. And that's what they did when the president came out. That was what he used when he had his big placard saying these are these tariffs. Well, the International Trade Court ruled that went beyond the scope of what was meant by that act, and so that put a pause on it. It will likely get escalated to the Supreme Court, and I think, given the conservative nature of the Supreme Court as original intent of the Constitution and the laws that say the tariff authority goes to the Congress, I think that ruling will be upheld. So those large tariffs that were implemented across the many different countries and all goods will probably be upheld in the Supreme Court.
I don't know. It made me think of, I'm a history buff, so it made me think of Julius Caesar, where like caused a lot of chaos in Rome, and then goes to Rome and says, "Hey, there's a lot of chaos. It's an emergency now. I need to call the shots."
Yeah, that's right.
And it was like, it's kind of that.
Yeah.
I don't want to venture too far into that territory.
No, but I want to say something. What also I think is, again, similar. What is so frustrating, and also partly the beauty of, if I could say that, with those tariffs that he implemented on other countries, because Trump would complain that some other country is behaving unfairly because we're running a trade deficit. Well, I think the other country would like to know, what are we doing wrong that's unfairly? Tell us what industry is, and we could do something about that, right? And it would have been easier. But that's not Trump's approach at all. Trump's approach is I am just going to put a flat tariff on, and now you guys have to worry about it. You guys come to the table to me and tell me what you're going to get rid of so we get better market access. And so in that sense, it's frustrating because the other country doesn't, or the leaders or the representatives of other countries don't know how to open up their barriers. But also, from Trump's perspective, he's just saying, well, just come to the table and start giving me things, and then we'll see if that's good enough for me to lower the tariffs. I should say most of the agreements we've seen come out of this since, say, the UK agreement, and I can't think of what the other one. The other countries didn't give up much of anything in terms of accommodations. The tariffs still remain elevated. We really don't get better market access for any of their goods. But again, it's a case in which the administration can say, see, we won, we negotiated something, I'm a champion negotiator. I've yet to see an agreement with a country coming out where I could say U.S. producers or U.S. consumers are big winners as a result. Again, and that's the one thing, if we have any hope of with these higher tariffs, I think, is as a negotiating tactic that we end up with a better place in the long run. I just haven't seen it yet with any country.
So, and I want to, because we've talked before, and these particular policies, I'm going to just sensing your tone on them. It's a little, everyone's reacted, and every economist that you're the second economist we've talked to.
That's
so
happy.
I'm making it sound like it's everybody. I sit on the phone all day with economists, and maybe all you you and Jackish are my two links to the economics world, and you both have the same reaction, and it's just sort of like, it's confusion, and it's like I don't see the win here, is kind of how everybody's reacting. And I wanted to set the stage, though, because you've had conversations with you tend to support this administration, their economic policies historically, right? Like, I mean, the first administration, right? Like, I feel I sense the lean towards like, I like this.
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay.
I'm sympathetic to some of the things they've done in terms of deregulation, and again, trying to help out small businesses. I think they've been very good on that dimension. Other things but yeah, again, like any administration, there are some things I like, most things I don't.
Got you. Most administrations, I don't like most things they do. But I guess what I'm getting at is like, there's not a political bias when you're looking at this. Like, you're just looking straight at economic policy. Like, this is.
No, that's right. That was, when I did work in the, I worked for President Bush. It was really the group I worked with. It was great in the sense is we were a very nonpartisan group, that we just only looked at the economics of it, and then we presented the economics of it to the president and say, you do whatever you think. Sometimes the economics won the day. Sometimes it were these non-economic issues. Again, you tip your cap and you go fight another day. But I think that's one of the traits of economics, is it is nonpartisan in its approach, and it's basically looking out for the welfare of both consumers and firms, and making policies off of that.
Well, let's go to and like I said, what I wanted to lean towards is like, because everyone's reacting kind of the same way to the tariffs. Is everyone's looking at like, oh my gosh, what are we getting? And then when we see the results, we haven't seen strong results out of them yet. It's sort of like we hit with a tariff, we have the conversations, and then it goes back almost to baseline unilaterally across these agreements. Like, let's take the UK, for example, where we slapped a big tariff. We had the conversation. To your point, the country comes to the table like, I don't know what I did. And then like, well, what are you going to give up? Well, I don't know. Would you like a fruitcake? Like, like
we get a couple more Bentleys.
I'll give you some coffee. Would you like some coffee? I got some water. Like, they're throwing stuff at us. And then we're like, all right, well, we got some coffee and some water. We're going to drop the tariff back. And it's sort of that kind of approach. Is that kind of the picture that we're painting?
Unfortunately, that's what we've seen. In fact, but when they drop it back down, they didn't drop it back down to where it was pre-April 2nd. They drop it back down to 10%, which is the minimum they said they were going to do on the big placard day of April 2nd.
Right. So there's a little asterisk just hanging out there of like, yeah, it didn't go to zero. We got this little boop.
Yep. So we still end up, we're better off than we were 4 weeks ago, worse off than we were at the start of the year.
Got you.
Yep.
Let's jump into the big, beautiful bill. I was just saying, like, the one thing that I am sort of enamored with is the naming of things, because prior to this administration, every bill, the name sucks. They're terrible. It's some acronym that stands for, like, too many people were sitting at the table that didn't have a sense of humor, that had real, like, there were like too many legal minds were at the table, like, oh, we're gonna. And it's a big, long acronym nobody could pronounce. The naming conventions are amazing. As a marketer, I love this stuff.
Yeah.
So big, beautiful bill. Where are we? Because at first we're going through with it and this thing's getting pushed through. Now there's a stall.
Yeah.
And now there's, some talking heads are starting to waggle a little bit, saying this is going to increase our debt, right? Like this is. Yeah. And so where does that thing sit?
Yeah, I think that's the big concern now. And the ex-government official Elon Musk came out strongly.
That was a big one.
Yeah, I think that's this is the problem. If you read every year, and I'm sure no one does, and they're probably better off because of it. If you read the Congressional Budget Office kind of year-end summary or their forecast, it always says that the path that the U.S. is on, spending and revenue-wise, it's not sustainable. And what this bill does is it makes it less sustainable even faster, right? I mean, there is a timeline where, the debt to GDP not too far into the future will be 150 to 200%, and increasing the size of these deficits from potentially 4% of GDP to 8% is just going to is going to expedite, when the government is going to have to do something more drastic about where we're heading. At some point, again, what is the big economic concern, right? If you're running large deficits, the real concern, I think, becomes at some point, other individuals in other countries won't want to hold the debt. And so that means you have to raise interest rates. And once the government starts raising the interest rates they're offering on the debt, that becomes a big problem in terms of, one, it'll push up all interest rates, make it harder for firms to borrow, invest. It'll increase the interest rate on already a large debt. That means there'll have to be government programs that will have to cut or make smaller. It will lead to a bigger problem at some point when people start worrying about holding U.S. government debt. And I think, with a deficit this size, you're just moving up that date where people worry about it.
Really quick, because you're a professor and I'm going to put you under this microscope. For listeners, okay, conversations happen all the time, and we talk debt, we talk deficit, we talk other governments holding those debts. Can you define those terms really quick?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's an important thing. People talk about it all the time, and I feel like people don't understand the definitions. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that everyone talks deficit and no one defines what it means. Everyone talks debt, no one defines what it means. And people sit there going, well, yeah, the deficit. And it's like, okay.
Yep, it's a good question, and of course they sound similar, so that they're easier to complete.
They do, and that's why I wanted to, for anybody listening. So, like, I'm armoring you up with education here.
So the deficit really is, you can think of it as yourself as an individual. Your deficit is a year-to-year measure. Economists like to call it a flow, but you can think of it as a measure over a period of time. It's how much I am spending more than I'm bringing in. right? So any college student, most likely they're running a deficit because their expenditures paying for college is more than their income. For you and I, at least I hope it's the occasion for me, it probably is for you. You're probably any year bringing in more than you're spending, so you're saving for your retirement. In that case, you're running a surplus. So a deficit is a year-to-year difference between expenditures and what you're bringing in, income or revenue. And if that's negative, then you're running a deficit. The debt is the accumulation of all of those deficits over time and all the surpluses. So when we say we had a deficit this year that was 4% of GDP, that means GDP, we produced 17, $18 trillion worth of goods. Our deficit was 4% of that. I should have picked a number where I could do the math in my head. But that is what happened in the year. When we say the debt is 110% of GDP, that means the total amount that the government owes to other individuals within the states, to individuals in other countries, that now is greater than our GDP, our total GDP. It's 110%. So again, at some point, what we would expect to happen, and this is a good point, we expect deficits to occur from time to time, right? If you're a farmer and you have a bad year, you're likely to run some type of deficit. But what you would like to happen over time is, those things kind of even out, that your surpluses kind of wash out your deficits. And what's really concerning about where we have been, say, the last 4 years coming out of the pandemic, is you typically run surpluses in good times, right? But here we are in an economy with low unemployment, pretty good GDP growth. We continue to run deficits, and that just doesn't seem right. So then you wonder, and the big concern is what happens when times go bad, when your revenue drops, when your tax revenues fall, and you have to increase spending. Then your deficits get much larger. So again, I think when you look at where we're at currently, when the economy has low unemployment, relatively good GDP growth, you'd like to be closer to being in a surplus or having a very low deficit.
And you talked about debt and who owns that debt. Explain that process really, because that's another one I feel like that gets discussed, and people talk about China owning our debt and then calling it due, or different other countries owning American debt. Explain that process of buying our debt really quick.
I mean, so I think
101 level.
Yeah. So I just think, just like anything, right, is when the government borrows, they go out and ask different people who, they sell bonds, but it's basically saying, well, we need to borrow. Do you want to hold these bonds? And it's the case that individuals in the U.S. and individuals in other countries and individuals in governments in other countries like to hold U.S. debt. And the main reason is because the U.S. is typically a safe haven, that when everything looks like it's going bad, it's good to be invested in the U.S. because historically the U.S. has weathered the storm as well, if not better than any other country. So again, it tends to be a safe haven. It tends to have a relatively secure return. You're not worried about getting paid back on it, rather than holding, say, debt from some other countries who historically have had trouble. So again, it's one of the reasons why other governments, individuals and other governments, want to hold the debt. It's because it's a relatively safe and secure asset. So now, of foreign countries, Japan now is holding more debt than China is now. They took over again for China. So the concern that you had, or a lot of people mention, of other countries, say, selling off those bonds in order to hurt the U.S., you do worry about that a little bit. but not a lot, because if they start selling off those bonds in great numbers, then that ends up hurting themselves as well, because you drop the value, increasing the supply of that good, you drop the value of that good. And so that harms the other value that you're holding. So it's a simple way of saying that it's unlikely that you'll see all at once someone get rid of all of their bonds, because they're going to hurt themselves in the process. Now,
that makes a lot of sense, because you flood the market and you decrease the value.
Yep. And so I think what you are going to see, and what you've seen a little bit, is, again, some countries diversifying away from holding U.S. bonds, but that's different than dumping.
I got you. So it's maybe some diversification of their portfolio, so offloading a little bit, but still keeping some, because it's a safe asset, historically safe asset.
And it's denominated in U.S. dollars, and so much of world trade is done in U.S. dollars that you want to have some asset that you can quickly convert to dollars should you need to make oil trade or other trades. So again, we do get some privilege from the U.S. being the U.S. dollar being kind of the currency of the world in many markets.
And then last bit here, as far as, because I kind of started thinking about going down this rabbit hole as far as the definitions and overall head, because I feel like the conversations always jump 2 steps ahead instead of making sure that people understand what these things are. The last part, as far as deficit goes, the conversation always goes back to what everyone calls entitlements, that is our biggest piece of our budget that gives us a deficit. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, and that's where you're going to get most of the growth from. It's going to come from Social Security and Medicare primarily, and then again, you also worry about, sometimes gets lumped in with entitlements, is the interest payments on the debt. And as the debt gets bigger, as interest rates go up, that becomes a bigger component. So it's difficult to slow down the growth of those, right? I mean, the Social Security issue is one, because the baby boomers are going to be retiring. So you're going to have a group of retirees that we have obligations that we have to make those payments to. Medicare, you have 2 things. You're going to have more people in Medicare, and you have rising costs. So again, those are the things that are adding the most to the deficit. That's why I was skeptical at the beginning of DOGE, because they were looking at what's typically referred to discretionary spending. That's spending on defense, that's spending on education, fire, police protection, a bunch of all the services. That's a smaller part of government. It's part that probably has less waste involved in it, harder to cut things out. And so I just wasn't optimistic that attacking that aspect, that part of government spending, you were going to cut out a lot of waste and fraud there, because that's not the growing part. That's not the part that's going to be causing that could potentially be causing issues in the coming years.
I had the same thoughts, because when DOGE came in, and I go through this from a personal perspective, as far as like when my wife and I get together and we run our house budget, right? Like, we have a spreadsheet and we take in all of our expenditures and we take in all of our income. And it's like, all right, I want to get a hold of our bottom line. I want to start cutting some things out. And then you start going through, you're like, all right, I'm going to cut Netflix. Okay, I'm going to, that one membership that I have, the gym membership that I don't go to, I'm cutting that. And then I get to the full end and it's like, I have saved $40 a month. God dang it. Like, you know what I did is nothing. I did nothing. Right. If I really wanted to save money, I would make more money, or I would sell my house. Like, that's right. Like, and I don't want to sell my house because I live in it and I like my house.
Yeah.
That's sort of what we're looking at. And the house is sort of like the Social Security Medicaid. Now, when we're looking at Social Security Medicaid, are we looking at more? Is it true Social Security Medicaid, or is it sort of these fingers that have started dipping into it for different things?
It's true Social Security Medicaid.
It's actually taking care of people.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, as you mentioned, what we really need to do is make more money. I think the government looks at that as well. And I think one thing that has always strikes me as I look at tax revenues that the government is bringing in, and again, the way to look at it is tax revenues as a share of GDP. So you can see how it's changing as the scale of the economy changes over time. And if you look at that, it's very flat at about 16 to 18%. And this is going back in time. And why is that surprising? Because we've had a host of different tax policies. Well, you know, whether it was the Reagan tax cuts or the Kennedy tax cuts or the high taxes that were before Kennedy, or the increase in taxes under Clinton, or if you look at all these different tax regimes, we still end up at about 16 to 18% of tax revenues as GDP. So it would have to be, to be able to raise more money or raise our income, you would have to have some real big change to the tax code to bump that number up. And I don't just mean simply raising the tax on the top, 1%. It would have to be something broad-based where you get rid of a lot of exemptions, including the mortgage and things like that. And that's not a winner. Again, that's why we haven't done anything on the debt or the deficit, is because the incentives for politicians aren't there. If you want to be, you're not going to win many elections saying, I'm going to fix the deficit, which means I'm going to raise your taxes and I'm going to reduce the government programs. That's just a non-starter. And so that's why we just haven't seen the political movement to reduce the deficits either. You'll get somebody like Rand Paul from time to time being a deficit hawk, but most people realize you're not going to win with higher taxes or lower government programs.
And is it, when we're talking about those things, are we looking at, is it the cost of care or is it the actual expenditure? Like, because when we're looking at Medicaid, right, a big part of Medicaid is the cost when you're paying, $10,000 for a set of shoe covers, right? Like, I'm making that up, but obviously, but does that play? How large is that economically? When we're talking
so again, that's a real good point. And one of the things, again, I saw some numbers recently, is it looks like over the last 3 or 4 years, some of the cost of healthcare have plateaued. And prior to that, why that's notable, prior to that, those costs were rising much faster than almost everything else, certainly much higher than overall inflation. And so, at one point it was about 50-50. Why was Medicare rising? It was, one, because we had more people going into Medicare, and two, because every service they were getting was also going up in price. Now it looks like, again, hopefully it looks like it'll be more of a numbers problem than a cost increase issue. But again, that's all, looking at 2 or 3 years is a very short horizon.
Got you. So in other words, the only way we're really going to attack the deficit is we all pay more taxes, or is there an argument for flat tax? Is a flat tax sort of something that would?
I would like to see something like that. I think there's a way that you could do a flat tax and again, address some fairness and equity issues.
Seems like you could delete some loopholes and simplify the process with a flat tax pretty easily, but that's everybody from the outside looking at it. And I think nobody wants to jump on that political grenade. So
nobody's going to give, nobody wants to give up their mortgage insurance deduction. And so that's one of the big ones that would have to go. I just moved to a new house, so I'm not ready to give that one up.
None of us want to. Yeah. So as far as, if we're looking at it, if we're going to go anywhere, it's going to be entitlements. It's going to be, and I don't like saying entitlements because everybody paid into it. Like, it's not like it's,
There's a way you would think about, there's a way you think about doing that in which you kind of ease into it, right? That anybody who's over 60 now.
Yeah. Right.
And if you're 50, you get 80%. that seems to be the way to do it, to give people more time to plan and make adjustments. I think anything along, one of the, going to a more privatized Social Security, I haven't heard any talk that in 20 years. I mean, that died in 2004, I believe it was. And so I don't think you'll see anything like that. So if you're going to see anything in terms of reducing entitlements, it's going to be some kind of grandfathering down to a smaller amount. There are other things you can do. Is you can increase the retirement age. Of course, with Social Security, you could change the cutoff income or eliminate the cap, right, of when the FICA insurance goes away. That would be a way of adding more funds to that. But that even gets a lot of political opposition.
So moving forward,
Yep.
As far as economically, are we on good footing?
I think the numbers have held up pretty well.
Because everyone's been saying recession for like 3 years now.
But the recession numbers jumped up. Prediction numbers jumped up dramatically after the initial tariffs, and in fact, in Q1, we did have negative GDP growth, and I think a lot of that was due to, again, just the idea of the tariffs coming on down the road. I think it resulted in businesses having to change a lot of their activities they were doing in advance of that, which just acted as a drag on the economy, which slowed things down. This Friday, we'll get a good sense at 8. We'll get a sense of what's going on. I think at 8:30 we get the new jobs numbers. So you'll get the new unemployment rate and how many jobs were created. And I think this will be, kind of what I would say the first numbers that we're getting in the post tariff regime to see if it's really starting to drag on the economy or not.
Excellent. Well, and I want to pay attention to time too. I don't want to run you over in case you have a meeting coming up. But one, I wanted to thank you. And I didn't expect it to kind of go this direction. It was like I kind of wanted to jump into the big, beautiful bill, but then I started thinking about concepts that, like, there's a lot of things that are discussed that sort of don't get defined for people that are watching and listening. And it's like, because I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people and they start rattling off things like deficit and debt. And it's like, you pull that whole Princess Bride, like, I do not think that means what you think it means.
That's right.
And so it's one of those, like, okay, let's go forward and define this from somebody way smarter than me and get some actual definition. So it's not me doing it.
Good luck finding that person to bring on your podcast.
It was supposed to be you. Come on.
Sorry.
No, it is you. So no, I thank you very, very much. This has been a really cool conversation. I appreciate your time. Love to get you back on here again. You've been on here before. You've talked to our company before. You've been a great friend to us. So
I really enjoy talking with you, talking to the people, and talking in front of the whole group at the different conferences. Always one of the things I look forward to each year.
Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very cool. And enjoy your summer.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.
Yeah.
This concludes episode 140 for the National Land Realty Podcast with Dr. Scott Baier of Clemson University. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com. And please remember, subscribe to this podcast. That's how you can stay in tune for the next podcast that we drop. Now, thank you and have a good one.